President Trump and Kim Jong-un meet in Singapore for the U.S.-North Korea nuclear summit. The media suggests that Trump is ripping children from the arms of parents on the U.S.-Mexico border, and the LGBT community ramps up their attacks on Chick-fil-A. I'm John Prophet, and this is The John Prophet Show.
The final defeat of ISIS.
Fire and fury.
The Thomas Fire is now the third largest wildfire in modern California history.
Hurricane Harvey, which has been slamming parts of Texas pretty much all day.
What I call the basket of deplorables.
You are fake news.
Russia's interference in the 2016 election.
Gorsuch will now fill the Supreme Court seat left vacant by the death of Justice Antonin Scalia.
So Donald Trump nixed the Iran deal.
The United States Supreme Court is allowing the Trump administration to enforce the latest version of the president's travel ban.
Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall.
President Trump and Kim Jong-un recently met in Singapore to go over the nuclear agreement that they're working on. And how do you think that went?
Getting a good picture of everybody, so we look nice and handsome and thin.
Beautiful.
Perfect.
Doing great. We had a really fantastic meeting. A lot of progress.
We will be stopping the war games, which will save us a tremendous amount of money, unless and until we see that the future negotiation is not going along like it should.
So about as you'd expect, lots of fanfare, lots of media coverage, media attention and hype. But as far, they signed a deal, but as far as the deal goes, we're still pretty unclear about what's going to come out of it. You can probably guess, though, how each side of the political aisle in the U.S. reacted to it.
Chairman Kim achieved far more than President Trump did. The summit was much more show than substance.
The president says North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat.
Yeah, so on the flight back from North Korea, Trump tweeted out about the agreement with the North Korean leader. And the tweet reads as follows: Just landed a long trip, but everybody can now feel much safer than the day I took office. There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Meeting with Kim Jong-un was an interesting and very positive experience. North Korea has some great potential for the future. So everyone on the right is immediately jumping to defend Trump. They're basically calling him a genius, or everyone on the left is doing the exact opposite, as we would expect, and calling him an idiot and basically giving everything away to North Korea that he possibly could. But the fact is, we really don't know how successful this summit is or not, because whether North Korea disarms or not is really going to be revealed in the near future. They did sign an agreement together when they were in Singapore. Basically, the basic aspects of the agreement were that they agreed to better relations between the two countries. This really means nothing. This is extremely broad language, and just because they're agreeing to better relations, that they don't define better, they don't define relations. They're just gonna be better friends apparently. They're going to work to establish peace on the Korean Peninsula. This is also very not clearly defined, so we don't really know what's going to happen. And North Korea agrees to, quote, work towards complete denuclearization, but we don't really know what work towards means. You could say you're working towards losing weight, but if you don't hit your goal weight until 8 months later or never, it doesn't matter. If you just say you're working towards it, we don't know when they're actually going to agree to that. So that working towards language is actually a worse and weaker compromise and agreement than the 05-06 deal that they came to with North Korea, which, as everyone knows, was a failure. So just because they have agreed to work towards denuclearization, we don't know what the timetable looks like. So no one should get too excited or too pessimistic about it based off that. They also agreed, this is one of the few things I think actually came out of the summit in Singapore between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. They did agree to return the remains of all of the soldiers, all the U.S. soldiers who died during the Korean War. Those remains have been in North Korea for decades now, and we're finally going to get some of those back. And I think that's obviously a net positive, but overall, I don't think that a lot has come out of the deal that we should be, really happy about as far as the U.S. side of it goes. The U.S. and Donald Trump said the U.S. and South Korea are going to stop doing joint military exercises together. This was taken by surprise, for South Korea. I have a problem with it for a number of reasons. The first reason is Trump, when he announced this, he referred to them as quote-unquote war games. He said we're going to stop doing war games with South Korea because we're negotiating in good faith with North Korea. Well, we don't actually know that we're negotiating in good faith with North Korea because we don't know if North Korea is actually going to do the things we want them to do or not. And he should not be referring to these as war games, because war games is a term that Kim Jong-un or the North Korea propaganda would use. And this is very much Kim Jong-un's rhetoric, and almost Donald Trump shouldn't be using the words that Kim Jong-un would want him to use, because he can just turn that around and spin that right for propaganda for his own purposes. These are military exercises. We've been conducting them for decades. There's nothing wrong with the U.S. and South Korea showing our strength, particularly in this region when it comes to the bad behavior of North Korea and China. I don't know why Trump is being so kind to him. I mean, I understand they're trying to come to an agreement, but no leader or country with nuclear capabilities has ever given up their nuclear capabilities because of flattery or comments or compliments or bribes even. It never works out. The only time they've ever given up their nuclear capabilities is when there's threat of force. So I don't think Trump giving up the threat of force aspect of this is necessarily the best way to go. Of course, he can just turn on a dime on this issue and say, oh, if North Korea does something bad we don't agree with, we're just going to immediately start our military exercises again. He obviously can do that, but I still think he shouldn't be stopping in the first place. He referred to these exercises as extremely provocative. Again, this sounds like Kim Jong-un talking. It's almost as if Kim Jong-un shoved his hand up Donald Trump's ass and starts using Trump's mouth as a puppet. I don't like him using this North Korean propaganda rhetoric. I don't think it's good for the U.S. interests in the region. All I've really seen so far coming out of this summit, besides us getting the remains of our soldiers back, is basically Donald Trump walking arm in arm with one of the worst people on the planet. He's been complimenting Kim Jong-un on being smart, being talented. I don't think this is the best route to go. The only U.S. win in this scenario is complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of North Korean nuclear program, capabilities, weaponry, and materials. And we need proof that everything has been destroyed. We need unrestricted access to inspect their nuclear sites and military facilities. Anything less than that is not going to be a win, no matter how much you want to try and spin it in Donald Trump's favor as a win. We haven't gotten any of those things yet, so it's not a win. According to the North Korea press, which is obviously state-run, Kim Jong-un decides everything that's on there. They've been reporting from the nuclear summit that basically there's going to be quote, joint disarmament, which would mean that not only is North Korea denuclearizing, the United States is also getting rid of their nuclear capability, which, of course, the United States is never going to do. Obviously, we'll never do that. And it's natural for Kim Jong-un and his regime to spread their lies to their people because they're trying to come off as being this great nuclear power who is on the same level as the United States. And yeah, I think there are some concerns that Trump meeting with him on this level kind of gives him some of that credibility. I do really have issues, though, with the American flag being flown next to the North Korean flag. Tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers died to keep that flag from flying over South Korea, and I really don't think it's great optics. But my biggest complaint from this summit in Singapore is that human rights and specifically the human rights abuses of North Korea were discussed in no way whatsoever.
You have spoken so passionately about the circumstances that led to Otto Warmbier's death. Yeah. In the same breath, you're defending now Kim Jong-un's human rights records. How can you do that?
You know why? Because I don't want to see a nuclear weapon destroy you and your family. Well,
so that's a cop-out. Trump will have to discuss human rights at some point moving forward. The Kim regime is one of the most evil regimes to ever, walk the earth, and it has to be held accountable in some way. Like I said earlier, I am highly concerned with Trump's praise of Kim Jong-un, calling him talented, a good leader. kind of praising some of the ways that things work over there.
He's the head of a country, and I mean, he is the strong head. Don't let anyone think anything different. He speaks and his people sit up at attention. I want my people to do the same.
So the reason Kim Jong-un's people do everything that he tells them to do, the reason they sit up at attention when he tells them to, is because they're worried that they and their families will be brutally tortured and murdered if they don't. So this is obviously not something that the leader of the free world should be striving for. Donald Trump shouldn't be praising the way things work over in North Korea in any way. I mean, this guy is an evil, murderous dictator. He killed one of my good friends from high school. He has 25 million people who are enslaved in the largest open-air prison in the entire world. He has 200,000 people in Russian-style gulags, which essentially means that because they're political enemies of his, they're people he doesn't like, he's forced them into these labor camps where they're just doing labor for the sake of labor. They're not actually building anything. They're not actually trying to accomplish anything. They're just being put to hard labor to punish them, to torture them, and to ultimately kill them. This is a horrible regime, and Donald Trump needs to keep that in mind, and we need to make sure that we hold the regime accountable. At the same time, I'll say the people who are being hypercritical of Trump, obviously, aside from myself, the people who are being hypercritical of him at this point are people who, at the same time, were very positive, very optimistic about Obama's Iran deal and praised him very much, even though I think you could easily argue that the Iran deal was a worse deal than what Trump has done in Singapore with North Korea, which in itself is also a very weak deal. We have to be careful and obviously keep in mind that the Kim dynasty has lied to the West about denuclearization 8 times since 1992. So that's 8 times in my lifetime that they've lied about it. I do not support the U.S. pulling troops out of South Korea, which is something Donald Trump really wants to do. The only way I would support that is if we had a united Korea, which obviously would not happen until the Kim regime was eliminated. I think when it comes down to determining whether this summit overall was a success or a failure, I really think you have to consider whether this is the first step in a process of denuclearization and a process of making North Korea into a Western civilized nation, or if this is the end goal. We're happy with what's happened, and we're going to kind of walk away from it at this point, because if this is the end goal, it wasn't a success. The U.S. is going to have to get a lot more out of North Korea for this to be considered a success, and we're going to need complete and verifiable denuclearization of North Korea.
So, if I may, hello everybody, the intern making a appearance after the first story.
Interner jumping in.
Yeah. I like to remain more optimistic, Do I hope that North Korea and America do work something out? Yeah, I do, definitely. Now, am I happy about that, meaning the flattery of Kim Jong-un? No, I'm not. Hopefully we do work some out.
Well, I think, there's nothing wrong with optimism. There's nothing wrong with being optimistic. My hope, and that's what I was kind of saying, if this is a part of the whole process, that's fine. If this is the end goal, that's obviously not going to work. So, but I am cautiously optimistic moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we do work something out. In terms of the way it's being handled in general, the complete glossing over of everything that Kim Jong-un has done to all of his citizens, the complete, it doesn't sound like they mentioned Otto Warmbier at all.
They know. That's why I said they didn't talk about human rights. I had a huge problem with that.
See, this is why I don't think the president's the most intelligent man on the planet, because
I don't think anyone thinks he's the most intelligent man on the planet.
No.
Even those who like him, I don't think.
No, yeah. He is conveniently glossing over the really hard stuff so that nobody gets mad about him for it. He's technically, obviously, we're talking about world leaders here. None of this is easy, I'm sure. But relatively easy stuff would be, please do nuclearize your weapons. Mm-hmm. If you get rid of your gun, I'll get rid of my gun too, and then we won't shoot each other anymore. Mm-hmm. I feel like he took the easy way out in saying that sort of stuff and being like, you know what, America's going to denuclearize too. Which, who knows if we even will or not.
Well, there's no way we will.
No.
America will never get
America
rid of
has
nukes.
too much pride,
We have too many nukes, and we're too, we're considered the most powerful military force. Yeah, exactly. We're never going to give that up.
No, never going to give you up. Sorry, I thought about that. So, I think that I think the glossing over was very much intentional because he's got too much of an ego to really let anybody try and tear him apart or for anything, to let the public see him do anything. Yeah, he's taking baby steps here.
Definitely.
Which might not be what we need from the Singapore summit.
Right. And then let's hope it's a baby step and not a final solution, because it hasn't been a success so far. And we have to prove that they've gotten rid of their nukes, because that's the only reason we're coming to them. That's the only reason we're talking to them, is get rid of your nukes, and we can try and make your country a better place for you and for your people. But right before Trump went over to Singapore, he left the G7 summit in Canada. And, well, he made a number of big mistakes there. There were two that really stood out to me. The big mistakes for him were his take on trade and his take on Russia. And let's start with Russia.
Russia should be in this meeting. Why are we having a meeting without Russia being in the meeting? And I would recommend, and it's up to them, but Russia should be in the meeting. It should be a part of it.
So yeah, Trump suggested that Russia should be added back into the G7. In my opinion, this is obviously a dumb idea. Russia was kicked out of the G8 for a reason. They were kicked out for invading and annexing Crimea. There's no way they have earned readmission into this group. The G7 is an institution for democratic nations, and we should celebrate an institution that celebrates some of the great democracies of the world. And we should, we should be using, Trump should have been using his time in Canada at the G7 to work on strengthening our alliances, strengthening our relationships with our allies. But instead of using that time to strengthen our relationships with our allies, he decided to piss all of them off and, praise Russia in the process. Which gets to the second thing that I wanted to talk about, what Trump did in that the G7 was he completely botched trade. Anyone who's been following, me for the last year or so, they know that one of my biggest complaints about Donald Trump is how he handles trade. He always tries to blame economic problems facing our nation on trade and on the supposedly evil trade deficits facing our country. The only problem with this is that you literally, as a consumer, as a trader, as a business person, you only have trade deficits with someone who you do business with, who you do trade with, where you're giving them you're the one who's getting less money out of the trade. So basically, every time you've done business with someone, like every time you go to the gas station, you buy gas. Every time you go to the grocery store and buy food, you technically have a trade deficit with those places. Does that mean because you don't want to have a trade deficit with the grocery store, you should start planting, make a garden and plant vegetables and fruit in your backyard because you don't want to have a trade deficit with a grocery store? Like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's not an efficient way for you to go about your life. So like I said, just because you have a trade deficit doesn't mean you're doing poorly. In fact, trade is consensual, and I use this example a lot because it's pretty simple, it's pretty basic. If you're doing a trade, let's say you're doing a trade as an NFL football team or as a fantasy football team, when you make a trade with someone, it's consensual. Both parties are supposed to be getting something out of it, and both parties do get something out of it. Now, not everyone always fares the best in that trade, but that's on you because you're the one who agreed to the trade. So while Trump was at the G7 and immediately after the G7, he essentially started multiple trade wars with several of our closest trading partners and allies, starting with Canada.
We move forward with retaliatory measures on July 1st, applying equivalent tariffs to the ones that the Americans have unjustly applied to us.
Well, President Trump responded with this tweet while flying here on Air Force One to Singapore. Trudeau of Canada acted as so meek and mild during our G7 meetings, only to give a news conference after I left. Very dishonest and weak. Question, Mr. Navarro, is that really how we want to deal with our second biggest trading partner?
Chris, there's a special place in hell for any foreign leader that engages in bad faith diplomacy with President Donald J. Trump.
Here's the thing. I mean, he really kind of stabbed us in the back. He really actually, you know what? He did a great disservice to the whole G7. He betrayed...
Trudeau did.
Yes, he did.
So at the end of the G7, Justin Trudeau made a surprise announcement that Canada was going to be putting retaliatory tariffs on the United States. And as that announcement came, Trump basically refused to sign the G7 communique. And as soon as he left the G7 on his way to Singapore, he started tweeting about how he was going to start implementing potential tariffs on certain countries to punish them, particularly Canada, Mexico, countries like that. I mean, when it comes to Canada and Trudeau, I mean, these guys were our allies literally 5 minutes ago before Trump decided to do this. I think Trump, he believes that the U.S. economy is so strong that he can kind of make these threats and make these moves on trade and basically do whatever he wants to these countries because we're so powerful. But the matter of the fact is, the U.S. economy is very strong. You know, it's the strongest economy in the world, but the economy can still be hurt. I mean, just look back 2008 when we had the Great Recession. I mean, our economy is not invincible. And if you're implementing policies that are actively going to hurt your citizens and therefore kind of hurt your economy, you know, at a certain point, it's going to have a negative effect. And while the U.S. economy can definitely be hurt by some of Trump's trade policies, the U.S. citizens can definitely be hurt by some of his trade policies. I mean, he started a trade war with China, Mexico, the EU, along with Canada. I mean, he placed tariffs on the EU, Mexico, and Canada for aluminum and steel. This, you know, just a couple days later, he placed $50 billion in tariffs on China, which they kindly reciprocated by placing an equal and exact amount of matching tariffs on our products. So, you know, the trade war is just going to keep going up with these other countries. One of the big products being targeted coming out of the U.S., one of the big U.S. exports was actually alcohol. U.S. distillers were hit with a 25% tariff from the EU, Canada, and Mexico, and they were all retaliatory. The only reason they put them in place was because the U.S. and Trump put tariffs on them. Whiskey accounts for 85% of spirits exported. Bourbon exports are up almost 50% in the last decade. And these are some of the tariffs and products that are getting hit the hardest. And those tariffs alone are going to cost the average American family $210.
So what it sounds like is happening here is America is punching somebody and then getting punched back and then crying about it. I mean, you start a fight with somebody, what do you think's going to happen? They're going to fight you back. And,
right. Well, that's what I'm saying. He shouldn't have started the fight.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So Trump's not. I mean, I think the people who are crying about it are the ones who are like, "Why did we do this in the first place?" Like me, it's like this was a dumb policy. And Trump's just like, yeah, Trump's like pissed off at people for punching back. It's like, well, and that's what Justin Trudeau said. You know, he's like, we're not, you know, Canadians, you know, we're polite, but we're not going to be pushed around. If you put a tariff on us, that seems to be put in place for no reason, out of nowhere, we're going to do something back. Right. And that's exactly what's happening. I mean, I think Trump will probably keep raising tariffs, though, because
he's not smart.
Yeah, especially when it comes to, I think he's extremely no matter what you really feel about him, I think it's hard to deny the fact that he is extremely economically illiterate. He doesn't understand, he doesn't understand trade. He clearly doesn't understand these trade deficits. I think he's going to keep raising the tariffs because he doesn't understand them. He's done it before. He's threatening to do it even more. And I honestly think he thinks tariffs are a good thing. He thinks we're getting screwed on trade, which, like I said, we're not getting screwed on trade. If you're trading with someone, it's consensual. You're agreeing to do it. Both parties are getting something out of it. Trump wants to completely eliminate tariffs, economic barriers, and subsidies between all G7 countries. I think that's great.
What's he doing?
Exactly. Well, that's what I think with his tariffs, that's what he's trying to do. And if it works, that's amazing. That's great. But if he doesn't accomplish this soon with this policy, he's going to have to back off this trade war because it's just going to keep hurting the American citizens. I think what's even more concerning is that obviously I mentioned the tariffs put on place by China in response. Both countries are going to keep rationing up their tariffs. It's going to hurt the U.S. consumers, which is what I'm mainly concerned about. It's going to hurt the Chinese consumers, but I don't care about that. But it's going to hurt people in the U.S. who are trying to buy things. Which is everyone. Everyone's trying to buy whatever they need to get by on a daily basis. And the higher these tariffs go, the harder it's going to be to get out of this trade war, because the worse the fallout's going to be. So I highly recommend that Donald Trump and even the people who think he can do no wrong do their research, look at economics, and just realize that tariffs have never worked in the past. They're a tax on the U.S. consumer, and making your own citizens pay more money for a product is not going to help your economy. So, as it turns out, Donald Trump hates children. This is no surprise if you're on the left.
Do you agree with children being taken away from?
No, I hate it. I hate the children being taken away. The Democrats have to change their law. That's their law.
Sir, that's your
They
law.
Why
do you keep lying about it, sir?
That's the Democrats' law. We can change it tonight. We can change it right now. I will leave here. No. You need their votes. The children can be taken care of quickly, beautifully, and immediately. The Democrats forced that law upon our nation. I hate it. I hate to see separation of parents and children. The Democrats can come to us as they actually are. In all fairness, we are talking to them, and they can change the whole border security. The Democrats have control because we don't have the votes. The Republicans we need more Republicans, frankly, and that's why I think we're going to do so well in the midterm.
So this law is based off the Flores agreement, which was basically the court ruled that the law basically stated that families who come here illegally, and are arrested when crossing the border illegally, they have to be the children have to be separated from the parents. Because the children are not allowed to stay in detention. They're not allowed to stay in police custody. This was ensconced by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. This is an extremely liberal court. It basically says that when parents, children are not allowed to stay in detention, in custody, longer than 20 days. The Trump administration has in no way changed the country's policies on removing children arrested, when they're illegally crossing the border. But the media is, of course, trying to cover this as like Donald Trump is ripping children from the arms of their parents. This is a law that has been in place for decades, or at least over a decade. Even if you want the families to stay together, even if you want the families to stay with the parents to stay with their children, which I'm assuming most people do, I think you'd be a pretty horrible person if you didn't want them to stay together. The problem is currently the law states that you cannot keep them together. Like I said, if they're in custody for more than 20 days, they have to be put into some kind of foster care situation to make sure that the children are not being kept in prison. It's not a great policy, I'll admit, because oftentimes children end up with sponsors who are involved in human trafficking, or they're neglectful or abusive, or they're illegal immigrants themselves, so they don't want to stay in touch with the government. So, you oftentimes end up losing track of these children. I think it's probably a good idea to not bring your kids here illegally if you don't want something like this to happen, because we have a flawed system. We have a flawed immigration system. So oftentimes bad things happen when people try to come here illegally. The facilities that the children and obviously the parents even are being kept in, they're bad. The conditions aren't good. They're essentially being kept in these giant cages. They're not like, they're not quite like the size of a cage you'd keep like a dog in at the pound. They're like 4 or 5 times that size, but it's wired cages. They're essentially still in cages. You have young children changing the diapers of babies because the ICE agents, the people who have detained them, are not legally allowed to touch the children, so someone else has to change them. I mean, this is a horrible problem, and everyone is obviously trying to attack Donald Trump's administration, blame him for this, but the problem is Congress could solve this problem tomorrow. All they have to do is pass a law stating that if parents bring their children into the country illegally, the children are allowed to remain with the parents. No Democrat and no Republican in Congress has put forward legislation to change this law in any way. Congress has no teeth anymore. It's essentially a empty bureaucracy that does nothing and just basically abdicates all its responsibility to the executive branch. And because they always abdicate their responsibility to the executive branch, they're like, hey, Trump, why aren't you doing anything with this? But it's Congress's responsibility to pass the laws and to change this law if they want to. The Dems could pass legislation saying that the interpretation of this settlement was completely wrong and that the children should not be separated. But Trump is not going to stop enforcing the immigration law just because Democrats say he's being mean for doing so. I mean, these are laws. They're on the books. Don't be surprised when they're enforced. I mean, I could understand you being somewhat surprised considering how oftentimes Obama didn't enforce the laws. But now Trump, he literally ran saying he was going to be the law and order president. He ran saying he was going to enforce our laws, particularly the ones regarding immigration. So I don't think people should be surprised when Donald Trump's enforcing immigration laws. Some people say this should be used as a way to discourage illegal immigration. I don't agree with that at all. We should not be using kids in that way. We should not be having kids put into these situations in the first place. Of course, the current leader of the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi, suggests because of what's going on right now that there should be that people in the country should commit treason and that there should be active uprisings against the current administration.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
So like I said, these laws have been on the book for decades. The president is just enforcing the laws. The Democrats have made no effort to change the laws. Neither have the Republicans. It's true, they haven't. No, but I don't think anyone's blaming the Republicans in this case. They're mainly blaming, they're mainly blaming Donald Trump, and they're not blaming the GOP members in the House and in the Senate who should be held responsible for this, and so should the Democrat members. I really do have a problem with the media coverage because this decision came down during right before or during Obama's term, his entire presidency. He allowed for these things like this to happen. But oftentimes, and it seems almost constantly now, that the media tries to spin these stories as being anti-Trump, where they didn't cover it, under Obama's presidency. We talked on this show a couple weeks ago about how those pictures circulated where these children were being kept in these cages, and they were like, "Oh my goodness, look at what Donald Trump is doing to these illegal immigrants, to these children, and how horrible." And it turns out that the photos were from Obama's presidency, and they tried to spin it as it being Trump's fault. The only solution proposed right now by the left is that basically the Trump administration should not enforce the immigration law. He should basically let people enter the country illegally, and he should just release all individuals into the interior of the United States. He's not going to do that. If you're breaking the law illegally by coming here, you're going to be detained, and by law, you're not allowed to keep the children in custody. I think a big solution for this is if you're someone who is you're leaving a war-torn area, you're leaving an abusive situation, something really horrible has happened to you, you're fleeing something and you really need safety, you should seek asylum. Don't enter the country illegally. Don't try to cross the border illegally. Go to a legal port of entry, claim asylum, and they will let you in. They will grant you asylum status, and they will not separate you from your children. Do not put your children through danger by entering the country illegally and, exposing your entire family to being separated by entering the country illegally when you can go and seek asylum through a legal port of entry. And if the Democrats really have a problem with this and they really want to change something, they'll put forward legislation and instead of just bashing Donald Trump. But I don't think they want to put forward legislation to pass anything. I don't think they want to make any changes because in the 2018 midterms, they want to run on the issue. Look at how awful Donald Trump is towards Mexicans, to illegal immigrants. Look how much he hates children. They don't want any kind of changes to be made before the midterms because they want to use it as a campaign issue. So I think as a country, we need to just say no more homophobic chicken. So the Huffington Post recently published an article saying that if you love delicious chicken and then you must hate gay people. You must. The headline read, if you really love LGBTQ people, you just can't keep eating Chick-fil-A. The article basically says that if you really care about LGBT people, you won't eat there because it's extremely discriminatory against the LGBT community. So this all started, LGBT community has been going at Chick-fil-A for a while now, but this kind of all got brought back to the forefront because Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, had been eating Chick-fil-A during Pride Month. So he had to release an official apology for eating chicken during the month of June. So the article basically calls for people to stand up to Chick-fil-A, stand against their anti-queer position. The only problem with that is that Chick-fil-A isn't anti-queer. Chick-fil-A has never refused service to gay people. They've never fired an employee for being gay. They don't hate gay people. They just don't. The only thing that the LGBT community has a problem with is that the founder, the president of Chick-fil-A, because of his religion, he believes marriage is between a man and a woman. I mean, Chick-fil-A is in the business of selling chicken. They're not actively discriminating against the LGBT community or gay people at all. But apparently, the president of Chick-fil-A having his own position on what marriage is makes it so LGBT is, somehow hurting the gay community, even though they haven't done anything to do so. The article is basically saying you have to either stand with the queer community or stand with your stomach. Well, if that means I have to stop eating Chick-fil-A, I'm gonna stand with my stomach because I freaking love Chick-fil-A. That stuff's awesome.
I know plenty of gay people who love Chick-fil-A.
Exactly. I don't. Yeah. Why does the left? I feel like loves these binary choices where it's either you support equality for gay people or you love chicken and eat Chick-fil-A. Like you can't do both. It's like why can't I say yeah, gay people should be able to get married, but I should also be able to like eat Chick-fil-A without being like, having the gay community angry at me for it.
Right. It's that goes back to what I was saying before we started.
Yeah.
On both sides, if people just took a step back, took a deep breath, took a chill pill a little bit, and stopped caring about so much all the time, 24/7, maybe we'd be a little bit better off.
Maybe we don't need to be so outraged about this.
Right. We got bigger fish to fry.
Exactly. Or in this case, chicken.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. You beat me to it.
But the left has been having a tantrum now about Chick-fil-A for years. I mean, the Chick-fil-A has just ignored them. They've made no effort to apologize or to change its ways.
They don't have anything to apologize.
Exactly, and they don't have anything. Like Turner said, they don't have anything to apologize for, and that's. I'm glad they've taken that stance. I mean, that's exactly how people should stand up to bullies. Don't apologize for things that you shouldn't be apologizing for, and don't kowtow to bullies just because they come at you. Chick-fil-A is the best fast food restaurant in America, in my opinion. If you look at the polls, if you look at rankings, Chick-fil-A is America's favorite fast food restaurant. And
it's good.
And there's a reason behind that.
Yeah.
The food tastes awesome. The service is great. They don't turn down gay people.
Yeah, I mean, if they did, they'd be feeling
exactly. People would be like, oh, Chick-fil-A doesn't serve gay people. I'm not going to go there. I mean, it was just like the Masterpiece Cake Shop case we talked about last week. If I find out a place doesn't serve gay people, I'm not going to go. Even if I think it's their right to not serve gay people, I'm not going to go because I don't think that's an okay thing to do. I do think, though, that the left, or maybe more specifically the LGBT community, they want complete and total agreement on this issue. They want universal consensus. They want all people, I believe, to say, yes, gay marriage should be allowed. It's okay. But when it comes down to it, people are allowed to think differently than you. They're allowed to think things that you don't agree with. They're even allowed to think things that you might think are horrible. Never apologize for for your beliefs, especially if your beliefs are right. Especially if your beliefs are right.
I disagree with that to an extent, but if you're somebody who is a literal, Nazi, literal bigot, can't stand certain races of people for no reason other than their skin color, then I would say apologize for your beliefs because that's not warranted.
Right. But never apologize for your beliefs if you're right. Never apologize if you're right. But the Chick-fil-A controversy has really opened my eyes, I would say. We have to stop the homophobic chickens. I say we stop them one bite at a time. # eat more chicken. Hopefully Chick-fil-A will throw us a little sponsorship for that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Check out Axiom News Network. Go to the website. Go to our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe us. You can find all our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play. And thanks for listening. I'm John Prophet, and this is The John Prophet Show.